I'd like to introduce our Associate Superintendent, Jan Mays, who's going to give an update on the Environmental Task Force. We're also pleased to have Board President Lori Lieberman with us today.
I thought there was going to be a larger crowd and I would need to speak from the stage, but I decided to move down here. First of all, I just wanted to thank both Amy and Jerry for setting this up and allowing us to take a large portion of what would normally be your PTA meeting to update you. And the timing couldn't have been any better because we finished our second task force meeting earlier this morning. So I do have an update and I'd like to share it with you. First of all, I just need to say our meeting was very successful this morning. I want you all to know that you are very well represented. We have everyone from our board president, Lori Lieberman, who is an active member of the task force. We have representatives from the staffs of both Cabrillo and Malibu High School. We have parents from both sites. And we do have this following update, which I am going to read. The Malibu Schools Environmental Task Force held its second meeting today at Malibu High School. The testing plan created by Mark Katchen of Philmar Group was presented, reviewed, modified, and approved by the task force. The testing will begin by the end of next week at both Malibu High and Cabrillo Elementary. The approved testing plan will be posted to the district's website shortly. It can be found at www.smmusd.org. The testing plan is consistent with the board's direction to and the superintendent's direction to Mr. Katchen to conduct all of the necessary testing to collect reliable data that will answer all of the questions regarding the campus environment. The task force also discussed the fact that a Malibu parent group has hired Paul Rosenfeld of SWAPE to advise on testing protocols. I can tell you that the task force plan addresses the recommendations from Dr. Rosenfeld. We hope that the fact that the two scientists, independent of each other, targeted the same areas of focus will build that will build community confidence in the process and subsequent actions and demonstrates the district's commitment to seek the facts. At this time, the task force agreed that Mr. Katchen should consult with the Department of Public Health to confirm that the testing plans will yield the necessary information for medical experts to provide appropriate analysis and conclusions. We expect to have our first results from this testing by November 22nd. The district, we are encouraging that your questions are asked today. I think they've told you there are a couple different ways. You can either put them on the index cards that have been distributed. I think they're going to open the mics if you'd rather do them in person individually. We're going to try to answer the questions that we can today, but we do want to collect all those questions, so if there are those that we can't answer, or if they're of a very detailed topic, we will be posting FAQs on the website also. We do know that we have the interest of local media who has been following this story, and we thank them for that. Ms. Lieberman, Mr. Katchen, and I will be available in front of the school after this meeting in order to address those questions. So without anything more, I would like to introduce Mr. Mark Katchen, who has been hired as a consultant for the district. He is a certified industrial hygienist. He is an expert in this field, and he is going to go through some of the information that he has for you today.
Thank you, Jan. I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity here to address you all. And I want to go through just a few background pieces of information I think that will help set the stage for our discussion and future questions. So let's see if I can get this going here a little bit. There's just a few slides. First of all, I want to discuss this concept of risk so that we can all be speaking from the same hymnal, if you would, and have a similar framework for discussion. First of all, when we talk about risk, obviously it's multidimensional. In other words, there's lots of perspectives to risk. We look at concepts, and people throw out terms like hazard. And hazard has a couple components that we talk about. We really want to know about what's the potential exposure, what's the potential for a certain agent to cause harm. All those things add into what we call the risk equation. Sometimes when we talk about the perception of risk, you know, as a scientist, I'm numbers driven a lot of times, but that's not always what is the only component that goes into risk. Perception is very important. It's not something to be dismissed. And a lot of times we have to deal with different people's perspectives and perceptions. Yeah, I'll use the example where you might have a cube, and one person standing on one side of the cube sees a red square, and the other one stands on the other side and sees a yellow square. And in that context, both are technically correct, but maybe they're thinking it's a square instead of a cube. And so we need to find perspective and see the big picture, and then oftentimes it helps give us a better sense of what we're really understanding, what we're dealing with here. Again, risk perception is not misperception. As I just exampled with the cube, you can have two people have a different perception, and they're both technically correct, but we need to make sure we see the whole picture. And that's a lot about that's what risk is a lot about. Okay? Okay. The important thing is, and I know the district has emphasized this in the communications we put out so far, and in every meeting I've had with district officials and the board, it's always been that, first of all, look, you have the right to know what's going on here. Would you rather be up there?
I need you up there, please.
Sorry.
Because we are filming this for city TV, and we didn't plan for you to be down here, so we don't have any light on you. I'm sorry.
I was going to try and be a little more close to the action here. Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? Okay. As I was saying, that everyone has a right to find information out that's going to affect their lives. That's a given. Questions need to be answered in a very straightforward, frank, and open way. Information has to be provided in a transparent way. And I know we've made every attempt so far to do that. And as far as I've been told, clearly we're going to continue moving in that direction. And look, everyone expects their answers to their concerns to be addressed, and that we're making every effort to try to do that. So having said that as kind of a background, one of the first things that I did as part of this process was speak to about 30 faculty at both the high school, middle school, and at Cabrillo, to try to get an understanding of what their issues were, because that's where everything stemmed from. So in so doing, one of the things that I like to do is to look at kind of a summary of what the concerns were expressed by folks. And so this is an aggregate for the high school and the middle school. And you can see some of the areas that were of most concern. And we used this information. This is the high school. This is the middle school. I'm sorry, the Cabrillo, excuse me, at Cabrillo. So, and we use this information to give us an idea of what, in terms of assembling the plan, because we want to, can everyone see on this side? Maybe I'll stand over here a little bit. Sure. Let's see if I can. Okay. We use the information here to help guide us as a task force in identifying those key areas of concern. We also take input. Obviously, the task force, as Jan mentioned, have students on there, have parents, so all that input is taken and then put together to find and identify some of the key issues. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Okay. These are in the course of conversation. Right, right. So these are what people mentioned as we discussed it with them. Mhm. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Also, when you were speaking to us, you didn't tell us what you were doing, and so it wasn't like we knew you were going to chart it like this. So this data was not scientific, collected in any kind of scientific way.
That's correct.
It was conversation, and we didn't know you were going to make a chart like that.
Well, what I said was, if you recall, I did say we would assess and aggregate it. So this is this is how we start the process, and we aggregate the information, so that we can get at least some idea of what's on people's minds. So, okay. I'm going to get to the bottom line in a minute. Oh, the bottom line. Oh, I am getting to the bottom line. The real and the actual bottom line. I said, that's pretty good. Someone says, let's cut to the chase and we all go home, right? And I didn't even ask him to say that, you know. The last line is hypothyroidism, low thyroid production. Okay? So, and then again at Cabrillo. We'll put that up for a second so people can take a look at it. As I said, these were used as inputs to the development of a plan. And as a result, what we did was the plan is going to look at several different areas. First of all, I'll leave it up. First thing we're going to look at is what we call indoor environmental quality parameters. Specifically, we look at temperature, relative humidity, carbon dioxide levels, and particulates, dust levels. What that helps us to do is get a sense of what is the ventilation system in these classrooms and other rooms effective in providing either outside air or other types of circulation in the rooms. And and you'll see when you look at the plan, you'll see there's certain parameters associated with that in terms of interpretive framework. The second thing we were looking at is electromagnetic fields, because that was brought up. Electromagnetic fields are generated by any kind of electrical equipment, and particularly we talk about like cell towers or microwave ovens, for example, that you might see, or even Wi-Fi units. So we'll do a survey because a number of people raised that as a concern, as a question, and it's a fairly straightforward evaluation. So we'll look at that as well. The other thing we're going to look at is radon. And the reason we want to pick radon is this area has been charted by the State Department of Health Service as being a moderate, naturally occurring radon area. And there was a survey, as we were told, done in the early 90s. So we feel it's about time to just check it again, just to make sure that we don't anticipate an issue, but we want to take a look at that as well. And the last area to look at is PCBs. And the PCB issue is something that's in schools is a concern not just here in Malibu, but it's across the country. PCBs were used quite broadly in building materials like caulk, paints in certain cases. And as a result, we'll do sampling that will look at bulk sampling. In other words, we want to see, is it in fact in these building materials, number one. Number two, we're going to do some wipe samples, some surface samples, because we want to see has there been any spread of this material onto other surfaces, both vertical and horizontal surfaces, in areas adjacent to this point, especially since we found it in the soil. And our hypothesis right now, I should say, is that the source of that soil, the PCBs in the soil, is from, in fact, these building materials. So we're going to test that hypothesis. And the last one is we're going to test the air. So we're going to do bulk, wipe, and air samples. Okay, I'm going to get right to it. Boy, I couldn't have planned it. No, I didn't. I have to admit, I did. Did I ask you to come here and ask these questions? Okay, good. Well, I appreciate it because you're segueing it perfectly for me, so I appreciate that. So The air, as Jan mentioned, we are going to start testing hopefully by the end of next week. The testing for, let me go back and say, the testing for the indoor air quality parameters, we need to have people present for the carbon dioxide levels and the RH and the relative humidity and the temperature. So that's going to be probably not done right away. We're going to do that, maybe we'll get a few people, we'll start in some of it, but some of the areas around the quad where we don't have any people in those rooms, we'll have to wait till we get people in those rooms. The PCB sampling, though, has to be done on a weekend. And the reason it has to be done on a weekend is because it's a 24-hour sample. We want to make sure we can button the room up and put on the whatever ventilation system is currently occurring so that it's consistent with that. And that way we're not disrupting the kids. Yeah, so that's fine. We can do it, but we want to be able to. There's other classes that we want to do that they are occupied. So rather than have to come out 2 or 3 times, we figured we'd do it all at one point. Okay, so that's the general plan. We hope to, as Jan said, we hope to have results by the 22nd or so of November, and you know, as that information is available, we'll make it available as it becomes available. Yeah. We're going to test for, now, you could do a total or individual. Now, there's 209. However, if you look at the data, really there was only 1 or 2 that were present in terms of the analysis that was done well, if you're doing a total, we're looking for total PCBs. So, you know, really, in that context, we're going to look for a total PCB number, you know, for total PCBs, which would include theoretically all 209. We won't necessarily break it down, you know, 209 data points because it's going to be mostly non-detect. So we'll get the total number, and that total number is what we're going to be using to compare it with the framework, which is in this case for air, it's 100 nanograms per cubic meter. That's an EPA number, 100 nanograms per cubic meter. That's the number that's actually the most conservative because it addresses children at the age as low as 3 to 6. It goes up actually for children who are in the middle school and even higher for the children at the high school, but we'll take the most stringent level is what we're going to use. Wait, hold on a sec. The protocol was to do a TO4 or TO4A or TO10, and that's what we'll be following. Now, we'll look into this a little bit, but from that standpoint, the total number is really the key because if we end up when they do the analysis, they're going to look at all those cogenerators. All those cogenerators are being looked at anyway when you do a total PCB. Can you see me?
I need you to move a little.
Sorry. 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 Yes, I'm sorry. Please say it again.
Just saying we were instructed that was really important, that some PCBs are much more cancerous.
The Arcolor, which is the one we're really going to focus on because that's the one that there is the key part, the 1254. That's Arcolor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. All right. So anyway, so as we go through this kind of the process, the information will be made available, and I think that we'll address the issues that you're looking at the, you know, that you're concerned with. I think we're doing actually more than had been requested in that context, and I think these particular issues reflect the concerns of the people we spoke to. Now, having said that, this is an initial plan. You'll see that on there. So it depends on the information that we get back. We may do further testing, further analysis, further evaluation as it becomes something that we need to look at. So it's not the end of the end. It is the first phase of the process. Okay? Now, if you have questions, please come to the microphone so everyone can hear you, or and hopefully you've written it out too, because one of the things we're trying to do is if you have a question, there's a good chance that someone else will have that same question. We're going to put this up on the website. Please, if you don't mind, let me know your name and then go ahead.
Sure. Barbara Grucho. My son is a senior at Malibu High School.
Okay.
Would you please elaborate once again your plan with the testing for the air? Because I'm a little confused. We were advised that a machine should be put in a classroom, for example, with a special filter, that the filter has to be tested prior to use to make sure it itself does not have PCBs, that needs to be in a room for 24 hours. We weren't told anything about carbon dioxide or people having to be in the room. So I don't know if you're planning to do the same kind of air testing that we were advised would be ideal.
Right. So sorry for the confusion.
No problem.
It's two different things.
Okay.
So with the PCBs, that's right, use a puff sampler,
Right.
polyurethane foam sampler. What happens is we take that sampler, we put it on a pump that draws air through the sample for 24 hours. That sample, along with a blank, is sent to the laboratory. They analyze the blank to see if there's any
Correct.
contamination. You subtract if there is anything on the blank from the sample, and then that tells you what the actual levels are. So it's consistent with what you're being told.
Are you planning to do that specific test?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the air test, right?
Okay. Thank
Right.
you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Bill Bixler. I'm a teacher here. I was a member of the very first group that got together about this in the first place.
Okay, Bill, thank you.
The question I have is, when we're testing, would it make sense to test the neighborhood too? So we get a perspective, finding out whether it's just here or this entire area.
Okay.
So it's not just on the school.
You bring up an important point that I want to talk about here. And that's the idea of, thanks very much. Make sure you give her a card. You got it? Good. Okay, great. What Bill's bringing up is the concept of relative versus absolute guidelines or standards. Some materials, as in case of PCB, the EPA has put out a specific number for both what's the content in building materials, what's considered PCB containing, which happens to be 5 ppm, what's on a wipe sample, what's in an air sample. So those are absolute standards. So whether it's someplace in the general vicinity or general environment, or if it's specifically here, regardless, if we've got an issue in the school, then we got to deal with it in the school, whether it's a problem in the community or not. It may be, and if it's a problem in the community and it's not in the school, then the community's got to, that's a different issue. So in that context, we have an absolute standard with which to compare it to. So it gives us that framework. So it really doesn't, I don't think it really would give us much information in terms of this particular environment by doing it in the school. Off campus, excuse me.
To follow up to that.
Yeah.
If students are going here and there's a problem, if there's a problem at home, they're going home too. You see, that's because everybody's house was built with basically the same construction material.
Right.
It's everywhere or it's not everywhere.
After 1979, it was outlawed.
So I hear what you're saying. I think what we're trying to do here, because we're really concerned with dealing with it on campus, we're really trying to figure out what's going on here. I think it's another point that you bring up. What we're trying to find here is not necessarily or we may not be able to find the source of an individual's health issue. What we're trying to do is to rule out or find out, is the environment here contributing to that? It's a different question. It's a tough question. I appreciate that. But that's really, when we're doing this kind of environmental analysis, we have that type of limitation. PCB, as you indicated, is ubiquitous. It's not only in the building materials, but it's in the food chain. So if we were to go ahead and take a sample of your fat tissue, I'd find PCB in literally everybody's fat tissue. It's all over, and it gets concentrated. So as a result, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the area here in the school is safe for the kids. Yes, ma'am.
Let's see, the parents expert, Paul Rosenfeld, who has a PhD in environmental chemistry and specializes in PCBs, he says to all of us at the meeting that testing for mixtures of PCBs, such as Aerochlor 1254, is a sloppy way to test for it. And that was what this parent was referring to, that all 209 how do you say that?
Congeners.
Should be specifically tested, not as an aggregate, that's a very sloppy procedure. And I guess that's my main point. And yeah, so it sounds like you're indicating that when you're saying you're going to test for total PCBs, it sounds like you're indicating that the plan is to use that to test for not specifically for each individual 209. And it didn't sound like it would take that long. He said that the machine rents for $600, is that right? I think at the meeting? That's just for testing for the air. He said you could do each room in 24 hours and maybe take, anyway. My main point was all 209 congeners should be tested separately, not in a group, as you seem to be indicating, in order to test properly. One other comment, exposure to cancer is cumulative, and for my family, I would like to keep my exposure, I know there are PCBs everywhere, but I'm not going to move to Antarctica, but I would like to keep my exposure as low as possible. And I do want to identify myself in one more way. I'm a staff member and a parent. And the summer of 2011, my son and I were both here breathing that dust, and no one told us.
Okay. So thank you for your comments. Let me address a few things. The EPA framework, which we're looking at, which we have to use, is for total PCB. So we need to look at the total number to be able to compare it with the standard. So let me finish, please. Excuse me. I appreciate that. I appreciate it. I'm just saying we need to look at the totals. Now, the report that comes out will probably produce a number of cogenitor information. The main thing, though, we found in the soil samples, which did look at many cogeners, was 1254 was the main thing we found. All the others were non-detect, right? Right. So you know it's non-detect. So one of the things we're trying to do.
No, it's not non-detect. It's below the level.
It was below 50. I said it was, ma'am, the detection limit was 50 ppm, and it was non-detect, meaning that below that limit, they didn't see anything. That's what it referred to. I appreciate your doing that, and I'm trying to do that. So below a certain level, when we say non-detect, it means that there's a lower detection limit for any type of analytical instrumentation. The key thing we're trying to do is to make sure that we use a method so that if we set something at 100 nanograms per cubic meter, that we can see at least down to 50 nanograms per cubic meter. So that's what we'll be doing. We will, for sure, be getting some of the cogenitor reports. Well, it depends on the analytical. I'm saying that it's not a money issue, ma'am. It's not a money issue. We may have the whole thing, but the chemists and the detection of the machine that we're using will dictate those things. It may come out as these non-detect. It may look at all those cogeners. It looks for all of them, but we may not report them all because there may not be anything to find, okay? So it will look for a band. It's a standard analytical method. As I mentioned, the TO4A and the TO10 mentioned by Dr. Rosenfeld, it's a standard approach. That's the ones he told in his letter. So we'll be using that same methodology to do this analysis. It's the same thing, straightforward.
Years ago.
I'm sorry?
It should have been done when they first found it.
You know, I can't talk about, please.
I was following up to my question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Kathy Furbus. I'm a molecular virologist.
Sure.
So that's going to be the angle I'm going for.
Okay.
As you liaise with the LA County Department of Health, I'm just interested if the concern is about the thyroid cancer, I think, is what has everybody the most frightened. So there are at least 3 studies that I'm aware of that have come out since 2010 that have started to link parvovirus B19, which causes fifth disease. Very common. We thought it never did anything. to thyroid cancer.
Right.
And the pathways are being worked out. And I'm just wondering if, as the health department does their surveys, if they're going to include non-chemical exposures that could potentially explain the cases of thyroid cancer, which have everybody,
Sure,
frightened.
concern, sure.
So I just want to make sure that the health aspect of it that's not just chemical related is considered in the big
Yeah,
analysis.
it's a good point. Well, I'll bring that up to him. I think what they're trying to do is sort of as a initial cut through is to see, in fact, number one, is the incident rate even any higher here than it is in any place else in the county? That's the first cut usually. So depending on what they find in terms of that initial cut, if they don't find that the incident rate is excessive, they may not go to the next level. If they do, then I'm sure they will. Or we'll ask them to do so. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Bambi Young, and I'm wearing a couple of hats here. I'm a parent who sent the child all the way through Malibu High School to 7 years. But I'm also a member of a scientific advisory committee to the Cancer and Environment team of the American Cancer Society California Division,
Okay.
which is watching this quite closely. I was actually contacted by a staff person there and asked, what about Malibu High? And I've been asked to report back. So my questions at this time are fairly general. I probably will have more specific ones as you get into more details. I'm going to go back to the quote about people have a right to information that affects their lives.
Right.
So my main questions here are, why were parents and staff, and you may not know this, because you weren't there then, but why were parents and staff generally not informed when the PCBs were detected in the soil and they were excavated? Now, I understand the belief was the level was fairly small, but it was an elevated level. And those of us who are responsible for the care of young children, and those of us in the ACS committee are particularly concerned about those vulnerable populations, cannot make informed decisions about what risk we are willing to take, small or large, unless we're informed.
Right.
That was my first question. Do you know the answer?
I was not here, but let me. Can I say just one thing? It may address some of that, not 100%. But during what I did know, and if you can read this yourself in the document that says the remediation cleanup final report. If you read through that, one of the things that they did during the process of cleanup was to use dust suppression, so it minimized hopefully the dust coming out. And they also did monitoring for PCBs during that process. So, and all the results there again were non-detect. They didn't find any PCBs. So at the time, it doesn't address your question head on. I acknowledge that. I don't have that answer. The only thing I can tell you is, based on the information that was provided by Arcadis, who did the work, it didn't appear to be that there was any exposure beyond the limited excavation. I don't know if I don't know
He
if
doesn't know for sure.
you can please
Well,
read.
the problem is there was dust being raised, and I know of at least one teacher who brought her 3-year-old son on campus, and you know how little 3-year-olds like construction
Right,
equipment?
sure.
So the kid's like spellbound.
Right. No, I understand. I'm only repeating. I wasn't here.
Okay.
You're right. I'm only repeating what was in the
Okay.
report, and you can obviously check that for yourself, and it's on the website.
I will. But it is kind of a Prop 65 type of an issue, right? We need to be notified when there is a carcinogen present and there's a chance of exposure.
Yeah,
So-
I wasn't. I wish I
Okay,
could speak to
okay.
that.
No,
can't-
I knew you might not be able
Right.
to. And it is, there's two other, one very brief one at the end. But, and again, you probably won't be able to answer this. Maybe this is a question for the district. But since there is, in fact, good reason to think it might be that the PCPs came from the buildings, why has it taken so many years? It's now been a couple of years before we check the air in the buildings for PCPs. I don't understand how it could possibly take that long. If you know it's in the soil and there's a good chance, and you know that all the sealants might have high-quality PCB sealants, in them, why were we allowed to have our kids sent there for several years without anybody checking?
So, once again, they're good questions. I can't answer those directly. All I can say at this point, I don't know if Jan and Lori want to respond to that. The only thing let me say this though.
There are people here who can.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to give them have the.
Let's do that. The final question before you do that.
Okay.
And it maybe, has anybody contacted the Los Angeles cancer registry, because
Yes.
they have.
Yes, so
Okay.
we have, if you saw some of the information that's put out, we've talked to Dr. Wendy Kozin of USC, which is part of the cancer registry. They maintain it.
Right.
And she's involved in
But
this
Dr.
evaluation.
Deepin may be the person to contact.
Well,
I
Dr.
can call-
Kozin and Dr. Mack are the two people that, as I understand it, so they're both in the cancer registry, they're both involved in this process, and they'll be looking at the data.
Dr. Deepin is the one who handles cancer clusters, apparently. That's what I was told. But I can check with him.
Yeah,
Okay.
we-
Okay,
we
those
have
are all
ta-
my
we have
questions for
ta-
now.
we have talked to
Why
them.
don't you turn it over to somebody who can?
Anybody want to speak?
I have to just say one thing because you misspoke. When you said that no PCB was detected, I think you mean in the dust monitors. It was detected in the soil. I've read the entire report.
I was referring specifically to the air monitoring that was
But
done.
it might have been misleading to the press and to the community.
Thanks for clarifying. Help me clarify that.
Guys, I'm going to try to keep this in order. We have a gentleman here, limited time. We have people waiting in line for questions, so let's have him answer.
There's,
We should go up there, though, for the TV. In the good light.
You know, I think it's a very good question. I think it's one that deserves an answer. I don't have a complete answer for you. What I do know, when the soils were first tested and there were any levels discovered, and the remediation and the soil removal was done, and it was that air testing that happened. So there wasn't, the removal of the soil didn't cause PCBs to be in the air as they tested it. Is that correct? There was no knowledge and there was no thought at that time that it was being caused by any of the building. So at that time, we felt that it was only in the soil, that removing it was sufficient.
That's why we have an issue with the way you're handling it.
So,
That's ignorant. You're supposed to
well,
know.
I'm telling you, it deserves an answer. We will have more of an answer, a more complete answer. That's all the answer I can give you right now today.
next, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Cindy Crawford. I just have two quick questions. One is, you mentioned November 22nd or something that you'll have results. Is that, excuse me, it's my turn now.
Shh, please.
Excuse me, it's my turn now, okay? Thank you. But how long is it gonna take till we know it's safe here? Like November 22nd, is that the beginning of the answers or is that the end of the answers?
That's a good question. From my perspective, let me say one thing. As far as I know, in terms of the information we have right now, I'm not aware of anything that would cause me concern as far as what information we have up front. We will have, by the 22nd, we'll have information certainly on the PCB sampling, and that may lead us to having to do more analysis. So I wish I could tell you a clear yes or no. We will certainly have a better insight as to the status for certainly PCBs, and all the other information too will have been completed by that time. So PCBs are the last piece of information we'll have,
So I think
because it
you
takes a
just-
couple weeks for the lab to analyze the data.
Okay, I think you just answered this, but
Okay.
would you, I don't know if you have children, but would you let your child attend this school during this discovery process?
Not only have children, I have 4 grandkids, 4 granddaughters, as a matter of fact. 2 daughters, 4 granddaughters. And I don't have any information right now that would prevent me from sending my kids to this school. I would send them to the
Okay.
school or the elementary school or whatever.
Thank you.
Okay?
My name's Cindy Vandor. My question also, I believe, would be one that Jan Mays would be able to answer, or should be able to answer, and that is, I read that there was trenching inside classrooms this summer. Why wasn't that tested and monitored? Why were children and teachers allowed back into those classrooms without them being cleaned?
I mean, whatever way. Okay. Well, my understanding is, and I think actually Mr. Block might be able to understand some of this stuff. My understanding was actually the material was, the area was cleaned and put back together. You know, they put tile down as part of that. I can't tell you why that material was necessarily not tested, except to the extent that some of that material, for the most part, of all the sampling that was done, most of the data points in the PCB area were fairly low. There was a few points that were higher. Remember, all the numbers, and I think there's a good point about
Can I
this.
stop you there?
Yes.
You've already lost me.
Okay.
A trench was dug in the middle school quad,
Right. No,
tested for PCPs and found to have PCPs in 2011. The distance between the trench and in the middle school quad found to have PCBs, and the trenches in the classroom is what, 6 feet, maybe? Why wouldn't you have assumed, at the very least, that you'd find toxic dirt when you opened up a trench inside a classroom, then left it open, and then brought students and teachers inside that classroom with no knowledge of what you'd done over the summer, except for some very worried teachers.
right. I understand that. So
I'd like an answer. The people who are overseeing this project are here. I'd like an answer. I think everybody would like an answer to that, wouldn't you? That was this summer. That was a couple of weeks ago. This year? Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a photograph of those trenches in.
We have photographs of it also, thank you. But, yeah. I think everyone in this room understands that every time anybody trenches to lay conduit or lay something beneath the soil, you don't do air testing every time. I understand the connection between the 2011 tests and the trenching that happened last year. The primary difference, the soil that was removed around the quad was not native soil. It was soil that had probably been brought in from other sources. The soil under these buildings, it's native soil. We did not have any indication that native soil would have any levels of PCB.
All the soil that had PCBs is right next to the building. Probably came from the building.
I guess I'll ask my question, and you can maybe explain it too.
let me just respond. The only thing I can tell you now is one of the areas that we will be testing will be those rooms that were trenched. Okay, so we'll check it now. That's what I can tell you right at that point. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I've been a parent here 14, 15 years, so, and it's true, I don't go on board meetings. I'm a terrible speaker, but I do show up, and I think a lot of the teachers and parents over the time, and I know Mike Matthews told me once I was one of the best parents he had ever encountered, and now, so I just wanted to say to Missy, some of us do our best in other ways. Okay, so some of us do our best in other ways, but I've chased boys out of bathrooms a million times. So, you know,
Thank you. That's great.
all right, but don't accuse me of propaganda again, please.
Oh, I was just.
Okay, my question. 2 leaking 10,000-gallon underground storage tanks, USTs, and their dispensers were removed from Malibu Middle and High School property in August of 1992, and they were leaking. Benzene, I'm not very good with chemistry. Xylene, pesticides, lead, and PCBs. And they were found on the site between 2008 and 2011. Has any soil been tested for these products on the campus amongst the old soil she's talking about? And I can give you the thing. And because of this, I hope there will be comprehensive sampling and testing in the classroom air. So, and not just what you're describing, but my dear friend Hugh Kaufman, who says he knows you at the EPA,
Okay.
He's the leading analyst there. He says he wants the real thing done, and he says you know what that is. So I'll leave that for you.
Okay.
And he's watching you, he said.
It's a good thing. At least somebody is besides
Air
me.
dust, I don't think he meant that threatening. He's a lovely old grandpa, too. as well as outside soil for priority pollutants and radionuclides. And he also wants to know, does anyone know what the land title is of this property? Has anyone looked at the title to see what else,
Right.
you know, what bodies were buried here?
Right. So let me tell you that actually all.
And I also have a son that rolled around for 14 years
Right.
in this dirt, so I have a very
So I think
strong reason.
I think
to
all the
believe.
information that you're asking for is actually on the website. If
Yeah, I
you
took
look,
it all off your website.
well, not my website, but the
Yeah.
districts,
So
right?
these were
right.
my questions, though.
Right.
is,
So
what's
if you
gonna be
look
done
at
about it?
if you look at the now it's a little bit buried. So I'm going to direct you to what I finally found. It took a little time, but you want to look at the preliminary environmental assessment. It's Appendix G2. Appendix G2. Because that's where you see the risk assessment done. It gives you reference to the analysis of where all the sampling was done. It addresses the benzene and toluene issue. It addresses the PCBs that were sampled in terms of how much was there. So both of that, so it was looked at and the risk assessment was done for that area, for both of those things. So I would suggest you take a look at that. Basically, there was some benzene and toluene found. It was pretty deep, and I think that they.
If it's leaking, though, and this might be my ignorance, and I would say it was.
Right.
If it's leaking, and just because I live on a canyon hill too,
Right.
Things have a habit of going downhill in this area, especially the canyons, and especially we're young geology.
Right.
So if it was leaking back then, did we take every single piece of thing that leaked, and did it leak before it was found?
Yeah, I think when they
Thing in the thing in the
yeah,
thing.
my understanding was when they remediated that, pulled that out, they cleaned the
And
cleaned
they
the area
took all
around
the
there,
dirt
took that
from
stuff.
below it, too.
Right, that's correct, and it's usually about anywhere from 14 to 20 feet down, in terms of where it
If
is.
it's leaking, though, and if it'd been leaking for years before we found it, could it have made its way down to the middle school quad area? And
You know,
it be possible?
I think that when they did when they do the remediation, they do borings just to try. You have to delineate the extent of the contamination, and you're supposed to clean and take all that out. I believe that's what was done. I believe it was done. The big concern when you're dealing with a volatile organic compound or something like benzene or toluene is that it can get into the groundwater, you know, go down in the groundwater. That's what the state's certainly concerned with because it could contaminate groundwater.
that's what I guess I'm.
So they clean that up, and they want to make sure that it's not in the vapor space in the in the soil because
Yeah.
it can go up. So I believe as part of the remediation that was part of it. The other thing
Will
that
you be able to tell us this in
yeah,
the
sure.
report?
We'll take a. Well, we're not doing that sampling, but I'm saying because it was addressed, I believe, in the reports. The other report you want to look at, besides the G2 report or the G2, is you had a question about the title on the property, what the property was used before, right? So there was a Phase 1 environmental assessment done. That's also it's part of the EIR. I forget which, it may be G3 or something, but I don't know. It's one of the appendices as well. If you look for it, it should be relatively easy found. That goes through the entire history of the site based on records of, like the regulatory agencies. They look at aerial photos to see what the property was used for. I believe it was primarily agriculture before it was a school that was built in the mid-60s. But all that information is contained including title and all that, is contained in the Phase 1 environmental assessment. So I know we're throwing a lot of words around, but Phase 1 environmental assessment, preliminary environmental assessment, those are two different documents.
Okay, so that's where I would look.
And that's where you want
But
to
is
look.
that a clear title? That's the whole history of anything?
It should
that
give the
was
history
used
as much
for
as
waste
it's available. That's what they do
Okay, I
as
just
part
have,
of it.
just really quickly, one more question, but, sorry. Was the dirt that was dug up in the middle school classrooms this summer, and that was in August, 2 weeks before class began, was that tested for anything like pesticides or PCBs or anything? Was it tested at all? Was there any question? Because
I don't, according to
was
what
there
was
any tests at all?
Not that I.
Did people wear masks that were digging it up? Was there any hazmat protection for them?
You know,
Workers working there?
I think it's a very legitimate question. I don't have those specifics, so I don't want to speculate today.
Were the masks worn? Somebody had to have been there to see it. Were teachers told to wear masks?
That's what I think, because I want to be certain when we give answers that they are complete and accurate. I think it's
Well, why I'm questioning it is because what I was told, and I may be wrong, because I'm always wrong according to my kids, but the thing is that, I'm very stupid, but the thing is that what I was told, what I understood, is that the dirt that was taken up from the quad was actually taken from the side of the middle school building, and it was a trench 5 feet down. Is that right?
Parts of the deepest parts went 4 feet down, went from 2 feet to 4 feet.
And it was done around the middle school
It was
building.
right
So
along the
if it's
edge.
at the edge of the middle school building, and then you are cracking open the middle school floors to get in those pipes for the conduits for this lovely thing that I'm really glad we're getting in the middle school because we need them. But the thing is, why didn't we think, well, 2 years ago we had a little problem. And so why not now? We might protect people in case.
I think before I answer any further than
Okay,
I
I'll just give
already
them
have,
here.
I think this is a question that definitely needs, that definitely needs an answer, and that we can provide within the context. It sounds like this is more than one of you certainly have this question and want a response from us. So
Could
I
I
want to
show
make
the
sure.
picture of the classroom so the parents can see it?
We could actually, if you want, we can put it up on the website too. It's there available. Please go ahead.
Okay, just to clarify, so the PTSA meeting is formally over, so you may post other information. No, you're good here. PTA rules do not allow me to distribute or present anything that the board didn't approve of, so that's what she was speaking of before, when I would not
okay.
let her distribute the photographs. So there you go.
Well, thank you.
So I have just a couple
What's your
of...
name, please?
Oh, my name's Catherine Dow. I'm a mom of a 6th grade middle schooler that's just starting.
Okay.
And I have just a few very quick questions, and then I have a tough one at the end. One is that you had mentioned that this area was charted as naturally occurring radon heavy. So do you mean
Moderate.
by... I'm sorry?
Moderate.
Moderate, okay. So are you talking about Malibu High School, or are you talking about all of Malibu?
I'm talking about all of Malibu.
Okay, thank
Right.
you. So, see, that was easy. And then also another question is that the website that is supposed to be up with the FQ, the
Right,
the most
frequently asked
frequently-
questions, right.
So can we set that up so that we can all see each other's questions and answers?
Right.
Is that possible? Because that's not really up yet.
So it's not up yet because we're just gathering now.
Okay.
Hopefully by next week we'll start to have that information. It's one reason we want to collect this information today.
Okay, and the last very short question is that, is it possible to also post the raw scientific data in a scientific way? Because I know a lot of scientists. I have a PhD in chemistry, so I can actually read those. And it's really frustrating because I've had to go through 600 pages of legal mumbo jumbo to find my science. And it's too much. And,
I
and
get it.
if we can have the raw data for collection
Right.
and for the tabulated amounts, things like that, where you
It's-
collect it, that would be so great if that's possible.
It's actually there. I had to do the same thing. That's why it took me a while to find that G2, you know,
Okay,
that
so I
appendix.
wrote that down.
So all that information it's there. If you go, the latest thing that we posted was the mold sampling we did at the high school. That's
Okay.
there, the full report. So you always have the report, and in the appendices, you have all the lab results.
Gotcha.
So, and every bit of information that we post coming forward will be done the same way.
Right, okay, so I guess I skipped the wrong thing because the appendix was at the very end. In any case, but thank you for pointing me
Sure,
to that. And the
sure.
very last thing, before I say the tough question here, I want to thank you guys for showing up. I really appreciate that. And so the tough thing is this. I think that you're met with some animosity here. Is because there's a trust thing that's happening that we keep going back to, which is the 18 samples that were contaminated around the edges of the middle school quad. They were right next to the buildings, and they were done in 2009 or 2010, to 2010 or 2009. And this was searched out by Dr. Rosenfeld. And so when you look at the map of the 18 contaminated samples, I don't think it takes a scientist to see that, hey, why isn't it in the middle of the soil? Why is it on the edges of the soil? The entire top of the soil is organic. Now, like dissolves like, so the PCBs go where the organic materials are. So if it came with the soil, then why do we not find any contamination in the middle of the soil? Why is it only on the edges? So then you look at the map and you go, okay, see, this is the trust issue now. It's like, well, if Arcadis is such a reputable company, and I'm not debating that, but it just makes me curious, why did they not recommend search for the source of those PCBs on just the edges of the lawn and not going to a little further in to where the building materials were? And PCBs were outlawed in 1979. So the building was built in, I believe, 1963. So you have to question, okay, if the PCBs are there, and again, does not take a PhD to figure this out, right?
Right.
Do I need to go further? Are you guys following me? Okay.
So here's the thing. I have a call into the Arcadis people. I'm asking the same question.
So
Because
I think once you answer that, we're going to have more trust here.
All I can tell you going forward is
absolutely.
I looked at that and said, hey, you know, this makes. Thank you. Thank you.
2 weeks before school started this year.
Thank you. When I looked at that's why we put our plan together that addresses this issue.
Okay,
right.
great.
So that's all I can tell you is going forward.
Right.
Hopefully that, you know, it makes sense to me that that would be the place to start to look.
That's great. Thank
Okay?
you.
Okay.
Will you put that on a monitor? Can I have your questions?
I don't know if we'll put it on. That's a. It's not a projector there where it won't. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Hi.
What's your name, sir?
My name's Steve McKenzie, and I have a wife that teaches here and a couple kids here and a kid that just graduated. And I'm also in the commercial real estate business, and I've hired environmental firms and run phase 1s and phase 2s and remediation on probably 100 buildings.
Okay.
So I'm trying to gather a little context. Was the phase 1 done in preparation for the demo and the kind of work that the bond measure was going to do? That was the reason for it, right? Yeah. So was that, does that mean it was intended to be a more targeted phase 1, in other words, toward those parts of the project that would be disturbed by demolition and construction activity? I would expect that to be typical. I'm just.
Expert in developing phase 1, so.
Okay.
I mean, the whole thing was done. It was done as part of the EIR, as part of the environmental impact.
Right. But a lot of the EIR stuff obviously doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about.
Correct.
And certainly development approvals and EIRs, I mean, that's separate from environmental, from toxic issues.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I'm familiar with Arcadis. I worked with Levine Frick and the firms that merged into them.
Right.
And, I mean, for what it's worth, I've got as much at stake here as anybody, and I can, as someone in the industry, I can vouch for everybody. That's a very household name, major industry firm that is, not.
Correct.
It would be very shocking to me if they didn't do things by the books. But anyhow, I mean, I've been through the reports and I see where they went. They identified the places where there was PCB in the soil. Now I'm used to finding PCBs in transformers, maybe some chemicals like the termiticides.
Right.
I, in my experience in the commercial real estate business, have never heard of PCBs in building materials at a quantity that affected life safety outside of those two things I just mentioned. But what's your experience in that regard?
Yeah, I would agree. In other words, it's clearly it's been found in these building materials, but the point you bring up, I think, Steve, was a good one, is again, when we talk about the fact that it's present, the real issue is there a pathway to exposure? Is the concentrations high enough? Is there a way that people can actually have an exposure issue that really represents a real risk to them? So part of what we're trying to do here, by sampling the bulk material, the actual caulk, sampling the surfaces, the vertical and the horizontal surfaces, and the air, is to give us some insights to say, well, listen, it may be present, but is there a real pathway to where we have a real exposure risk?
Right.
So that's really the context. And as I say, risk is a combination really of the inherent potential of a material to cause harm, as well as the route of exposure and the magnitude of that exposure. So that you bring up some good points.
Right. The other question I have is, normally when you get closure paperwork from a firm like Arcadis that says we dug it out, we dug until we got to the floor and the walls of the prescribed digging area, we scraped the walls, we checked the floor, we kept going until it was all non-detect.
Right.
I mean, normally that would be a closeout. So I honestly don't understand why we think there's any reasonable chance that they didn't get it all, other than perhaps the fact that, these health issues, people are saying, well, I mean, are we doing this? I mean, I honestly don't understand what the case is for a reasonable chance they didn't get it all.
Well, let me,
I'm not talking about past exposure. I'm saying how
Going
do we
forward.
arrive at the reasonable
Right.
belief that there might, I mean, it seems to me we'd have to believe they failed in their core competency to think that there was much to find.
I think if our hypothesis is correct, that this material is from building materials, it would probably be an accumulation over 30 or 40 years. Remember, the levels, and this is not me saying it, we met with the health department last week, when they saw the numbers from the original environmental assessment that Arcadis did, they didn't get particularly excited by those numbers because they, again, were used to seeing, transformer leaks or other types of spills. But the point being that if that's the case, if this is, I would sense, at least this is the working hypothesis, that we see this accumulation over many, many, many years. It's pretty much, because it's close to the surface, it would be coming down from there and then going down into the soils. The issue here is not what we call an acute hazard in that context, meaning it's going to be a problem today. It's really going forward and saying, just like we manage asbestos or lead, we have management programs in place for all those things here. This might be the same type of thing. So number one is it present? And number two, what state is the material in? And what kind of hazard does it really represent? And what we're trying to do is answer those questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Again, PCBs for the most part, anyway, is a chronic, long-term kind of issue, not short-term usually.
Right. Okay, I get you. And then lastly, as I understood it from looking at the paperwork, the threshold they were applying to actionable levels was 30 years of exposure with periodic rolling around and occasional ingesting of the soil. Is that correct?
I think it was even more conservative than that. What they did, and that's a good point, when they did the risk assessment is based on making sure that no more than one person in a million would contract the end effect. So in this case, what they looked at, and that's how they
that's the actionable level. But,
right.
But I think that no more than one person in that number.
Right. So
after 30 years of exposure.
Right. So when they make then they back calculate what that actionable level is. When they do that, they do the risk assessment, which includes frequently. It could be. I think it's usually a longer-term exposure than that. Usually it's sometimes 70 years and a 24-hour exposure, and they took the highest concentration as a basis because they wanted to be very conservative in their assessment. So all this stuff is based on a fairly conservative risk assessment, which is fine, but they were very conservative. They didn't take an average concentration. It was the highest one.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Ingrid Peterson again, staff and parent. My son just graduated. He went here 7 years. Couple things. Arcadis may have had a good reputation, but they made a patently false statement in their final report. They said that the site of the excavation in the summer of 2011 and the surrounding area was unoccupied because we were on summer break. However, there were 4 active summer school programs that were active right around the middle school. We could have relocated, but nobody told us. So Arcadis was either 1, deceitful, or 2, incompetent, because they made a completely false statement. That's my first comment, because I think everyone should know that. My second is, having read the whole report, as well as having been here, the highest level of the PCB 1254 was found in that little triangle of dirt when you come right up from the parking lot and are next to room 1 in the middle school building. That had the highest level, and they had to go down 4 feet to get it all out. That is, I would say, 4 feet from room 1 where the trenching was in August 2013. So you're 4 feet away from the digging that was done a few months ago. The highest level of PCBs was 4 feet away, and no testing was done this in August. Okay, that's number 2.
I
Yes?
appreciate that. I just want to, because there's 3, 4 people behind you.
Yeah, I'll be quick.
Okay, if you have a question, I'm happy to answer the
No, I'd like
question.
things to be public also. Okay, here's a question.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have to say, there have been a lot of distortions, I think carefully worded distortions, I think even by the district, carefully worded, so it could be misleading. But also the press has gotten a lot of the facts wrong, just because that happens when you're writing newspaper articles. So I want things to be public. About the native soil issue, where is the documentation for that? You're saying it was native soil underneath, excuse me?
It was believed to be.
Well, that's not believed to be isn't good enough. We need data and science-driven, as we talked about.
I have promised to have that question fully, completely
Okay.
answered in an FAQ.
Okay, I'll go on then.
Are there other questions in the line that we could address?
Yes,
today?
I will go on to my last 2 then. Thank you. Okay, I also looked at the environmental impact statement quite a bit, which is separate from the soil removal documents. And I just would caution everybody, if you're reading the environmental impact report, parts of it are referring to the time after the contaminated soil are removed. They say in there, by definition, what they call the proposed project, which is the new building and renovation, does not, excuse me, let me finish, does not include the soil removal. So if they make a statement like this and this tested healthy, they're talking about after the contaminated soil was removed, not before or during the process. There's references to previous data too, but you have to read it very carefully, because by definition they say the proposed project in capital letters does not include the soil removal.
Just to reiterate, all that information is available for everyone to look at. I just want to make sure. Right?
But because it's 525 pages, if you just start to look at one paragraph and you read it, you might get the impression they're talking about this, maybe for me, the 7 years that my son was here on the middle school quad, or the summer that he was taking chemistry here while they were digging. And some of those paragraphs don't refer to that. They only refer to the state of the soil after that excavation project.
Okay.
I've read it carefully. And the last thing is posted by Arcadis after Appendix A, before Appendix B, are 4 photos during the soil removal project of the summer 2011. And by one of them's labeled July 21st. They're actually all referring to July 21st, 2011. However, by reading the daily field notes, I know they were taking pictures, I believe. This is the last one. Please be patient. They were taking photos every day, I believe, or at least many, many days. So I'm asking, would the district please, Arcadis has those photos, it says, would you please post and make public all those photos rather than just those 4 photos from one day?
We'll ask them, I guess.
We can ask
They-
Arcadis if they
Say,
are.
as I say, we have a.
It
I
says
have a-
they are.
I have a call into them, and I'll be asking a lot of these same questions. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Hope Edelman. I have a 6th grader and an 11th grader here. First, I want to thank you very much, Professor Ketchum, for giving us this time and answering our questions. I came up here with one question, but I waited online for so long that I actually got a second question while I was waiting to speak, which is based on what the gentleman who does these kinds of studies was saying. In the, I also read the removal action report, and and all the media accounts talked about, I believe it was a risk hazard index assessment, saying that the acceptable level was a 1, and our soil had measured 2. But nobody anywhere said, is that 2 on a scale of 3 or 2 on a scale of 10?
Right.
And then it seemed in the ACADIS report that the last soil sample they did before they left was a 0.3, which they judged to be below the acceptable hazard index. I was wondering if you could just translate that for lay people who
Sure.
don't understand what any of that means.
It's a good question. Okay. So there's actually 2 risk parameters that we're looking at. One deals with cancer, and one deals with non-cancer effects. What you're talking about was the non-cancer piece, okay? So the cancer one is the 1 in a million that I was just mentioning before. With the non-cancer hazards, they look at again, it's a formula, it's pretty detailed, but they plug in certain assumptions, and as long as it's below 1, then it's considered acceptable in that regard. And these are formulas and methods that are either derived by the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, or they may be developed by the state. And there's a couple of different entities that do that. A lot of it is an organization called OEHA, which is a risk assessment group in the state. So they generally generate these particular things. So that's what that's basically saying, is that we looked at both the cancer endpoint as well as the non-cancer endpoint, and we brought, by doing the remediation, it brought it below the target numbers.
Right. Did you just say if that 2 was on a scale of 3 or a scale of 10?
It's basically above 1 is what we're looking at. So we want to bring the 2 down below 1.
Okay, great. My second question is, I'm sure you can see how important transparency is to everyone in this room, particularly because we feel that there hasn't been full transparency up to this point. And you had said, we will make the information available as it becomes available. Now, when you were hired by the Beverly Hills School District to do air sampling in '99 and the early 2000s, parents had a very difficult time getting your reports. And I understand that's because a lawsuit was in progress and information couldn't be released because you were an expert witness for the defense. But given that we are not embroiled in a legal case, and given that you have technically been hired by the school district, I'm wondering if your test results need to be shared with the district first before they're disseminated to us, or if they will be released to the school district and the public at the same time.
So let me answer a couple things. First of all, with Beverly Hills, we did set up a repository, so the information was readily available to parents and students, even though it was, even the parts of litigation. So that really didn't have that much an impact, because the main thing there, too, was to get out as much information as we possibly could. And I think if you talk to the people from the district, that's what they would say in terms of our efforts to do so.
Well, actually, I talked with the parents. They have a different story.
Well, it was available because I helped put the repository together. The second thing was, in terms of the information is going to be released, just like the report that we just released on mold on Friday. We got that, I think, on Thursday. It was out there as soon as we get up on Friday. So there's not, any lag time. Obviously, the information comes in. It's got to be sent to the district so they can get it up on the website. But there's no significant delay in terms of that information, and I wouldn't anticipate any kind of significant delay here.
Or editing.
Editing, no. I mean,
It would not be proper for us to.
Okay, I'm just asking.
Manipulation, that is.
There's no implication, it's just a question.
the important thing is, regardless of what it says in the report, all the raw data is right there. You can make your own interpretation. That's
Okay.
the important thing.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Colleen Baum, and I feel totally safe at this school. But I am concerned about my peers and my teachers who are so afraid of school right now, and just everything it's causing, in the kids' curriculum, day-to-day activities. So people seem to be so concerned about the soil that has been removed and is obviously no longer a threat. And I'm not talking about where it's coming from, I'm just talking about, the soil's been removed. But I'm hoping you can characterize, in a way that we can all understand, the risk that we were in during that time. Because I think you said the standards for EPA is 5 parts per million.
That's the definition of PCB containing material.
Right, like that's when you have to start doing things. Or
You have to-
when,
you have to look at
when
it,
everyone's
right.
concerned, because
Right.
then you're accumulated, that might put that one person where their lifetime accumulation is more than the EPA wants to see, right?
It's the point where you would want to make sure that there is no exposure pathway.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's 5 parts per million. And
Right.
I looked at those reports and I saw that the highest on that first report, the highest number was about 1,400, I think it's micrograms,
Per
which equals
1.4 parts.
ppms.
Right, right.
So what's the, like, so for me, what other things in my life am I doing, like the fish I'm eating? I mean, what other risky things? Alcohol, you know, can you, or our kids are facing, you know, teen suicide rates. What are those? It was Red Ribbon Week right now. How many of our kids are out there stealing our prescription drugs, right? Tell me, as a parent, and all of us, and as teachers, you know, where should this be?
Right.
In our areas of like, oh my God.
Right. No, I will attempt to do that. Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you for the question. And I would normally and like to put that in perspective, but I do realize that this is, look, an issue for the community. And so we want to make sure we address it head on and deal with it. But when we write these reports, we'll make an effort to try to put this whole risk into context. But thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I wanted to ask about the claim that we found 11 times the amount of PCBs in our soil than what is allowed.
Right.
I know that there's an explanation for that, and I want to make sure that we get, you
Sure.
explain that to everybody. That's
Sure.
the first. I have like 3 questions waiting in line.
Okay.
That's one.
All right, let me take that one. So as we said, the 11 times is based on that 1.4 parts per million number. And I mentioned before, we do the risk assessment. So the risk assessment is based on, again, on 1 in a million risk. It's talking about the cancer risk. So they basically run the calculation and back calculate based on that 1 in a million risk. What does that look like in terms of an allowable level? About 0.1 is the number, 0.1 ppm. They found 1.4. That's where they get the 11 times. So again, it was a very conservative risk assessment. And so we looked at the highest number we found, and that number, in fact, was the basis of that 11 times.
What was the average?
It was, I have to go back and look at it. It's much lower. It was about 0.4, I believe, something like that.
So it's significantly less.
Yeah, you have to look at it. I don't want to misspeak, but it's actually in one of the data tables that you can find in the preliminary environmental assessment.
Okay, so the
Yes.
second question is, with the trenching that was done in room 1 and 2, which was the photo that they showed.
Right.
Since now it's closed up, and yeah, we probably should have tested for PCBs. We should have tested the soil. It didn't happen. It's closed up now. If we test the air in that room, will it tell us if there's PCBs in the soil below that are leaking through?
Well, if there's any PCBs in the area, either in the air or the surface samples in terms of the dust in the air, not the air, in the air or on the surfaces, we should pick it up with what we're doing.
Okay,
Correct.
and the teachers claim that there's enough dust in there from that it should hopefully show.
Right.
Okay, so the third one is the testing methods. Back to the air quality testings for SWAP, which is
Right.
Dr. Rosenfeld. The 2 tests, are they exactly the same? Or are they semi-different the way that you're going to handle them? I think what the difference was, was he asked for a modified EPA method 1668C for all the 209 PCB congeners, is that what you said?
Yep.
And then level 4 reporting. And I don't know what any of that really means. But is that the type of protocol that you are following since you said you're doing the EPA protocol? Is this the same?
Right. So for my perspective, as I say, we're going to talk to the environmental chemists, but that's, it's a standard approach. We're going to use what's called a TO4 or TO10. That's the EPA protocol. It will give us the information. The main thing we want to make sure is that the data we get back we can compare to this framework for interpretation. So it may speciate, and I'm sure it will speciate a number of these cogenerators. I don't know if it's 2 or 9. We'll check on that. But the main thing, again, because they found the 1254 was the main thing they found in the material. And I think for us, to tell you the truth, what's really going to be the driver on that a lot is what we're finding in the bulk samples. Because if our theory is right, if we find that it's positive in the bulk, which is the main source, we want to make sure that cogenerator is being tested for in the air, because that's what the likely source is going to be. So clearly, if you look at the data in the Arcadis report, most of them in all the different cogenerators were non-detect. They were at 50, which is basically non-detect.
When you say non-detect, that means that it didn't classify it.
It was below the limit of detection of the analytical instrumentation.
So it's not that we chose not to classify it, it's that we could not.
Could not, correct.
And then we are testing that bulk sample you're talking about, whether it's caulk or paint, both the inside and the outside
Correct.
of whatever rooms you pick.
That's right.
Okay, great. Thank
Thank you.
I'm Kristen Mason, and I have a 6th grader here, and my question is not for you. So
Okay.
Thank you for coming, though.
Okay.
I wanted to ask the board president and possibly CFO, I know that's not your official title, but along those lines, if we find something, there's a cause for some form of remediation or cleanup, does that come out of the BB funds if in tandem with, if some miracle occurs and we're able to push forward with the renovations, which are badly needed, and if this can serve as a catalyst for getting our kids into even the 20th century learning environment that they deserve, will the district pay for that? Will insurance pay for that? I'm just concerned because as the BB monies have been chipped away at because of the litigation and other things, is there something that we can do as parents to kind of push that forward and simultaneously not intertwine it so that we end up having to pay for it?
That probably is a CFO question, so I'll put on, okay. So I'll take that, put that hat on that I wear. Right now I probably don't have a complete answer. It would, very likely, it would be possible that we would look to our BB funds. It would be completely appropriate to use BB funds to shift our focus on what those funds were, what the plans have been all along into any kind of remediation. We also have a new bond measure that was just approved a little over a year ago, I guess, and that could also be a source of funds. We always look for other sources of funds if they're available. So if there was any kind of insurance, we really haven't given that a thought. Our first and primary focus is to get the testing done, get the testing that needs to be done, get that done, and then make an assessment about the remediation, if any, is needed. And probably after we decide what is needed, then we'll have to figure out where the money is coming from.
Yes, sir. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you, Mark, for coming, first of all. My name is Doug Walkna, and I have a child here who's been here for over 10 years, and I'm quite concerned about him. A lot of the talk here has been about those minimal risks, health risks, because of the reports that have been coming on. However, this all started because there was examples of skin rash, respiratory problems, asthma, and several cases of cancer. Now, if there's only minimal risk, how do you explain that sudden rash that's way over the normal percentages?
Okay. Thank you for the question. You know, I don't know if just like anything else when we're dealing with in terms of actually quantitating the number of cases of any one issue here, like we point up in the slides. The sampling I was doing was not a epidemiologic sampling. It was just to give us an idea. So I don't know if any one particular malady that was related was higher or lower than an expected incidence. I will tell you that one of the things that we're looking on, and that's what the health department's doing, is looking at just that issue with respect to the thyroid cancer, since that was a sentinel event. So I appreciate what you're saying. I think one of the areas that we're trying to do as part of some of the other general indoor air quality things, and part of the work we've done with mold work as far as some of the allergy issues related to that, we've been trying to get a sense and a handle around if those are issues or not. The mold stuff, again, it's been produced. As a matter of fact, if anybody wants to, there's the mold results. I was going to relate that, but we've been so focused on PCBs. But let me use your questions to talk about this a little bit. This is a summary of the report that was posted last Friday. And because mold may come up at some point in time in the future or now, especially if your children are at
Well, I'm kind of questioning why the focus on mold when it was the PCBs and the carcinogens that was the topic of discussion in the reports.
Because the teaching staff was concerned about mold in certain areas. So we try to look at all these things. That's just one piece of the puzzle. You know, that's what I was saying. When you see the plan, you'll see all the different parameters we're looking at. But I want to take this opportunity because it also helps me explain some idea of risk again. When you do mold sampling, we talked about with PCBs to contrast that, that's an absolute risk number we're looking at, right? There's a certain number we're comparing against. That's not the case with mold. With mold, we're really looking at a relative number, indoors versus outdoors. Mold is everywhere, and as a result, you're not going to be able to stop having exposure to mold. So what we're really looking at is making sure that the indoors is no greater than the outdoors. That way the risk is no greater inside than out. So you always do outdoor monitoring as a comparison. So that's what this line represents. These are the results of the indoor monitoring we did, and you can see all the results were less than the outdoors. So when you look at this, when I look at it, I say, okay, well, we're well below the outdoor. The indoor versus the outdoor, the risk levels are no greater than walking outside. And that's usually an indication that there is no what we call reservoir or amplification or source of mold inside. So that gives you a little idea of mold, but I digressed a little bit from what you asked, but just
we've actually been in touch with the EPA and consulting with them, and they seem to feel this mold issue is simply a deflection of the real issue to try to confuse everybody prior to the testing coming in.
Well, we're doing...
I appreciate that the mold's being tested. We all like that, but right. That's not our main concern. And our main concern is our health of our children here.
Sure. I appreciate that.
What can be done to test the children? Because we know that there was high levels of PCBs. What can be done to test the children now, blood tests or whatever, to make sure that they don't come down with cancer like the staff has been coming down?
So, we brought that question up to the people at the health department, and I would encourage you, if you like to speak with Dr. Rangan at the health department. He said it was not, specifically for PCBs, not a good idea to test individuals, and the reason being, because of their being so widespread. As I said, I think in my remarks earlier, every one of us could be tested and we'll find PCBs in our fat tissues. That's where you would look for it. Because of the fact that it's in the food chain, it's not, yeah, but medical surveillance data, it's not really well done, and the real problem with it is it's not well correlated to disease. That's the issue. the health department. I say, please, if you go ahead and you can look at the literature, you can talk to Dr. Reagan, I would suggest that you speak with him. This is what they were
So you're saying
telling
there's
us.
no correlation between these maladies that people are coming down with and PCBs?
What I said was the level of PCBs in someone's body that we would test for is not well correlated or predictive of any kind of endpoint health effect. That's what he said. So
you were involved in Beverly Hills project?
Yes.
How many staff and students came down sick there?
From what?
Yes, that you admitted to, that it was agreed to, that came down from the problems that we're having with the school.
There were, based on the surveys that we did and the analysis that was done, none of those.
So in your involvement with Beverly Hills, your results were that no one was sick at all?
No, I didn't say that.
Is that what's going to happen at Malibu as well?
No, I didn't say that. You're distorting what I'm saying, sir. What I said was, you asked the question, how many people came down sick because of exposures at the school? What I said was, as we went through and we did more than $1 million worth of testing, all sorts of testing, that none of it was found to be related to the environmental exposure. Not what I looked at. We had panels of experts. It went to court, and if you followed the case clearly, the case was actually thrown out of court because there was not sufficient evidence to find it. And believe me, if there was an issue, I don't have any particular vested interest in one side or the other except to try to find the truth. There's no, one way or another, that's what it's all about.
Who are you being paid by in this particular case?
Here?
Yes.
The school district.
The school district. So your primary focus is to protect the school district?
Not at all. Not at all. Look, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've been doing this for a long time. I've represented communities. I've sat where Mr. Rosenfeld or Dr. Rosenfeld sits. I've sat in this sit before. My approach is the same regardless of what side it is. It's always got to be the same. It has to be with scientific integrity. It has to look at doing the right thing all the time. There is no reason for me to do otherwise. Really, there's no reason.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Julia, who's teacher in this building. Okay. I feel weird asking my mold questions now because apparently that's not where we're going. But
it's okay.
So, did y'all conduct this testing?
No, another firm came in, had done this before I was involved with it.
Okay, and why are they not continuing to
do this work?
Do this work?
It was the district, for a variety of reasons, decided to use a different organization. But I reviewed their data. It had nothing to do with their data.
So then, what did it have to do with?
It was, I think, their involvement in some other districts, and they were either tied up or doing some other things. I didn't make that decision.
Can the district tell us? Well, I wanted to know, he said earlier that these were his results, but I didn't think that they were, so I asked who conducted this testing and then why they weren't continuing on with the process.
Well, Mr. Ketchen has been employed by the district to make sure that all of the testing that we're doing, that he is really here to guide the task force through the variety of testing that we may do, to help us establish a scientific protocol that will be able to answer all the questions. This particular testing was initiated before Mr. Ketchen was employed by the district, and it was done by a firm that we use on a fairly regular basis when we have questions coming from staff members or the administration of schools about air quality in classrooms. The name of the company that did this was Executive Environmental. There had been some questions raised by community that this was a firm that came through an insurance company that we actually belong to an insurance JPA, okay? And the JPA provides this service to us. They actually pay for a portion of it, and we actually pay for the lab portion of it.
Okay.
We use them on a regular basis, but there were questions that arose, whether the separation and the reliability, was this a company that was hired by the district, hired by insurance? Were the results complete?
Okay.
So at this point, we haven't said we're not going to use executive environmental anymore. We still believe their results to be completely and totally reliable and dependable, and that we can count on them. But because of the questions that were raised, we want to make sure that when we do produce results, and we do publish results, that we don't have questions about the people who are doing the testing.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say something just about this right here? We've moved 250 kids out of the music building. Where is it?
I say this was, at the time it was done, based on, I guess, specifically complaints about the mold in this building.
I'm one of those people.
Right.
So I'm just wondering why we have all these kids moved out and we haven't touched the music building, which is one of the ones that is vacated now.
Right.
Why is it just that one building?
For mold?
Yeah, because one of the cancer people, or two of them, including me. Huh?
Right.
That's not true. It's two. So, I just want to know why, if they're gonna make a test like that, why they don't do all the rooms. I know every room, but there's not, that other building hasn't even been touched. Why?
Well,
Been out for 2 weeks out of our room.
I understand. My understanding was was there a mold issue in your room? Because, well, that's what so usually what happens is this. When we're trying to do an environmental assessment, the first thing we say, look, is there a source or potential source? Just like we're doing with the PCBs, right? We have a hypothesis. We think, maybe it's from the caulking or the building materials. So it's got to be present before there's a reason to usually test. And the same with mold. There was some concern, I guess, because there had either been some water intrusion issues or there's some complaints by the teachers. And so that's why we focus and select certain areas to do that kind of sampling.
But the complaints by the teachers, two of the teachers in that room were complaining about
all kinds of things.
Something. We don't know.
Yeah, well, I interviewed those teachers, and it wasn't about mold. So, okay, so
I think,
that was not their issue.
I think Bill's concerned because of the repeated water leaking problems that have happened in his room and lab and things, so.
If it was, as I say, if it was something that we did, Bill, I don't know if we had a chance to chat during the interview, so I don't think we had a chance to you and I for chat when the interview came, so I would ask you that if you want to, I'm happy to discuss these points with you.
Okay, sure.
Okay?
Thank you.
He's one of the best teachers we have.
I don't doubt it for a second.
So this is the first time I've seen this, and I can't tell from looking at it if any testing was done in the ventilation system in the building. And I don't believe that it was, because I was here in room 1 when some of the testing was being conducted, and I didn't observe any testing of the ventilation system, and it certainly wasn't tested when the ventilation system was on, which I think would, if there was anything present, significantly increase whatever you were testing. So just putting that out there.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't do the test, so I can't.
That's why I
can't
started
address
with
it.
that question, because
Right,
I didn't see
right,
it there.
right.
Pardon?
As I say, we will consider all this stuff as part of this is an initial cut. We'll take a look at it again. Again, I want to encourage everyone, remember, the only way we can put together a plan that's going to address these issues is for people to come forward. So if you have an opportunity to give me a call and we can talk about it, I'm happy
Well, since
to.
I didn't find out that you were going to be here until
That's-
the
I-
meeting,
I-
I meant
I appreciate
previously when
that.
you came to interview us, we had found out about that, maybe
I
12 hours
appreciate that.
before, so.
I appreciate that. So that's why I'm saying that I'm available. We'll make myself available again.
And
Okay.
these I'm just going to give to Wendy because they're similar to other people's.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Hi, thank you for today. I just have one quick question to reiterate. The bottom line is, how is your methods of testing going to differ from what Dr. Rosenfeld recommends? I know you're going to follow the exact guidelines that he's recommending to the parents and the school here today.
Yeah, based on, I mean, as far as I read his letter, and from my reading of it, it looked like we were basically doing the same thing. In other words, we're using those same methods, the TO4A and the TO10, and in terms of PCBs, we've actually gone beyond what he's asking for in terms of looking at some of these other parameters, which he didn't raise. We're also doing wipe samples, which he didn't put up. So essentially, again, I need to look at it again. Dr. Rosenfeld and I had a discussion a couple days ago, and we'll continue the dialogue.
Okay, because it just sounds like the people here have a different opinion if it's going to be followed exactly how he recommends. Do you know anything right now off the top of your head to tell everybody here today that it's going to differ at all than what he's exactly recommending?
Because I don't have his letter committed to memory, I'd have to go back and look at it in a little more detail. But effectively, it looks like pretty much the same thing. I mean, most of these things, once you agree to do some of the sampling methodology, if we say we're going to follow this EPA methodology, you got to follow the EPA methodology.
Right. From what I'm hearing about these tests, the 294 samples, I'm not sure exactly what it
The cogeners,
entails.
right.
It sounds like he wants to do them individually and separately, and your position is that that's not needed, or that's not what you plan on doing. Is that correct?
Well, the question I have is always, when we talk about, is having a framework for interpreting the results. It was, someone asked the question, what does 2 mean? What does 1 mean? Okay. So if I generate a number and I can't tell you what that means, then it doesn't move us along in terms of being able to assess risk very effectively. The EPA guidelines do not break down by cogeners.
Do you think you'll be able to satisfy the parents here today and the teachers from guidelines from the EPA based on what Dr. Rosenfeld, who was hired by the parents here at the school, feels strongly about? Do you think you're going to be close to what they're asking him to do? Will you be able to do the same thing and not just go off EPA standard guidelines?
Well, we have to use a guideline to compare to. I don't believe that whatever Dr. Rosenfeld put together was, that he would differ from these guidelines. He didn't develop them, I didn't develop them, we're just pointing to them. So what we want to make sure is the data that we generate are comparative. So we'll make every attempt we possibly can to try to address the concerns of the parents. That's what it's all about.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Probably a half hour beyond it. So I think at this point, what I'd like to do is this, because I do have to be someplace else in another hour. So let me ask you to do this. If you have further questions, please, there is a email address, right? It's
MHSFAQ@smmusd.org. So it's MHSFAQ@smmusd.org.
Right. Well, write your questions. Because if you have a question, it's a good chance that somebody else has a question, 100%.